Hello, hello, hello. Hi. Introducing our next speaker, Jennifer Rondeau. Like plenty of other technical writers, Jennifer is an academic refugee who has spent years as a professional historian before turning to software documentation. Therefore, she finds herself continually applying the perspectives of a historian to her work, to the worlds of software and technical documentation. As you will see in her presentation, what's past is prologue, write the docs communities, and organizing techcomm. Here we go.
Thank you, Andrea. I've known Andrea for a few years. I've known a fair number of people in this room for a few years. I'll say more about that in a little bit. But first, there will be various meta bits in this talk, me talking about the talk. And so I'm starting with one, which is it's been the most challenging talk to put together, prepare for, that I've ever given, and I've given a lot of them. But it's very personal because I do tell stories about my involvement with a variety of Write the Docs communities. And those stories mean a lot to me. I hope they resonate with you because that's the point. The point is not that they're about me. The point is that they are about the community. And so finding that balance has been challenging. Every time I've tried to run through the talk, I've come up with a different version of it. And I stop and I say, I need to put this in my notes. And of course, I'm in presenter view, so I can't put it in my notes. And I've had conversations with some of you you'll recognize, since the conference started, that you'll recognize in some more bits of this talk, assuming that I get to them because I forgot to set my timer. However, in a little bit more meta-commentary, I want to say one more thing about my slides, which is the slides are there because people expect slides in the first place. And in the second place, to keep me more or less on topic, because there are a lot of different kinds of stories that could be told. But, well, you'll see. The other thing, before we start running through slides, is the most immediate inspiration for this talk, possibly not quite so obvious, but a couple of things happened right around the time of the Portland conference in the US. Because, yes, I'm yet another US person coming to Europe to talk to you about US things. I'm trying to make it less that way than I did in 2015. We'll see how well I do, because I still don't know. But the two things that happened at the start of the year and then sort of closer to conference time is in the United States, the STC, the Society for Technical Communication, declared bankruptcy and ceased operation. And that was a great loss for any number of different communities who made up the larger STC organization. A fair number of those folks found their way to Write the Docs, however, and something that happened at the Portland conference was STC people showing up and saying, oh my gosh, y'all are so welcoming. We feel like we belong here. This was just anecdotal hallway chatter, but it was pretty cool. Around the same time, and there's evidence on the Portland program, I started to notice conversations in the Write the Docs Slack about hardware. It's like, y'all talk about software all the time. Why aren't you talking about hardware? Well, we have a hardware channel. It's actually not much used, at least last time I checked. But it exists, and at the Portland conference, we had a talk about hardware documentation. It turns out that documenting different kinds of things besides software is not really all that different in many ways. And I might or might not say more about that later in the talk. First, again, sort of the prologue stuff. Because I'm not good at pictures on slides, I'm much more of a word person. But lo and behold, here is this, which is the title of my talk, neatly inscribed on the statue of the figure representing present as in the present, at the corner of the National Archives building in Washington, D.C., which happens to be where I live. Yes, I've walked past it any number of times without noticing until I gave the talk this title. Well, the title was originally opportunistic because my 2015 talk that this one does try to build on was called Back to the Future. So it had a vaguely sort of other cultural reference to the past and the present, and so I needed another one if I was going to give a sort of kind of maybe-ish follow-on talk. So, you know, what's past is prologue was nice. My father was a high school English teacher. And I knew it was from Shakespeare's Tempest, but that was pretty much all I knew, and I started digging into context because that's what word people do. And increasingly, for all sorts of reasons, we pay attention to words and the contexts of words, right? Well, turns out my choice of title was kind of really perfect. What's past as prologue is used in other contexts outside the Tempest with very different meanings I'm not going to say anything about. But if you read it in context, it's about the past really only sort of being prologue and the present becoming something quite different. It's uttered by one of two characters who are plotting to undertake yet another overthrow of this sort that produced the setting at the beginning of The Tempest, which is Prospero is exiled to an island. Well, if you know the story of The Tempest, and I'll just tell this much of it so you don't need to worry about whether you do, at the end of the play, Prospero all is restored to its previous proper order. Past has not been prologue. We don't see overthrow after overthrow after overthrow. Instead, the present becomes something different. It's managed to triumph over the past. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's what I think in the notion of software documentation history or of Write the Docs history should do. But what it does do is suggest that we aren't always just repeating the past. Now, in the world of software, well, duh, obviously what we do in software is make everything brand new every day, all the time. The past has no relevance whatsoever. Disruptive innovation is still in sort of the phrase of the day. This is, in fact, what prompted my original talk. But I have to do one more thing before I get to what I said in 2015. I prefer to put my acknowledgements at the start of a talk because every talk I've ever given has really owed a tremendous amount to the people I talk to, the people I listen to. Some of these names are on here because I've been talking to you since I got here. Some of the folks, though, on this list might be surprised if they watch the recording. They're in the US, so I'm guessing they're not watching the live stream. Might be surprised to see their names on there because they've never heard of me and they have no idea what they did. Well, they posted really cool shit on Slack. And it really got me to thinking about community, about different ways that people come to Write the Docs, about different aspects of the past and the present and where we might go. And so I'm thanking them because, like I said, this talk is sort of my stories and it's sort of really not. It's about all of us. Andrea's already told you that I'm an academic refugee, and I really am a compulsive historian. And I've already told you a little bit about how I came to write about the history of software documentation in 2015, because I was really getting tired of this. It's all shiny new. But so that is what happened. In 2015 was, I think, my second Write the Docs conference, although I spoke in Prague. The way that I came to Write the Docs initially was through the conference. The first conference was really the only thing about Right to Docs in 2013. And I, at the time, was living down the road from Portland in Eugene, Oregon, for people who know the geography. And if you don't, it doesn't matter. About a two-hour drive away. Let's just put it this way. And this is the US, so of course driving is how you... There's a train, but... So couldn't make it in 2013, but made sure I was going to get there in 2014, and had kind of what, at least at the time, people described as the quintessential Right to Docs experience. I fell in love. And I also I kind of fell in love with Read the Docs and with Eric's whole larger enterprise. And because I lived fairly nearby, the next thing I knew, I was driving up to Portland to meet with Eric in one of the co-working spaces where he had an office. And again, in what I think of as a quintessential open source experience. The next thing I knew, I was on the 2015 program as helping run the conference. I said to Eric, well, what can I do to help? And, well, you did ask, lady. This kind of thing still happens, you know. You are both warned and encouraged. You show up in any meaningful sort of way to any of the Right to Doc spaces, and eventually somebody's going to ask if you'd be interested in doing a thing. I'm going to hopefully come back to that, but I wanted to make sure I got it in whenever I could. So the next thing you know, because in my previous career, I was a compulsive conference hopper. 2015 was not my first rodeo show either. I'll say a little bit more about my previous academic career later in a different way. So the next thing you know, because I told you there were going to be various meta bits, and how could I resist? There I was on the stage in Prague doing my first round of US person telling Europeans, or a largely European audience, about mostly US things. I really focused on the history of computers. We don't have to go too far there, but that was irresistible. I hope you understand. So to say a little bit about what I did and didn't say in 2015, because this talk does try to build on some of it, and I really do not assume. I was actually appalled to learn that some people in this room did go back and watch the talk. I do not expect that. And it's not by any means even a useful tool, I think, for engaging with what I'm trying to talk about here. So I've already talked about this historical perspective and really trying to encourage people to think in terms of continuity instead of break. This is professional historian language. I mean, there are theories of history. Do we emphasize the stories of the past primarily as story where, you know, sort of the unfolding change of the past is in continuity with, you know, sort of past into present, is in continuity? Or are there moments of break where some great revolution of everything, whether it's politics or art or philosophy, changes everything because nobody ever organized that way or painted that way or thought that way? I don't know much about art history, so if there are Impressionist fans in the room, you can come take issue with me later. But the point is the philosophical, the sort of historical philosophical, historiographical theories about how we understand our relationships to the past. And to me, it's real important, not only not to forget the past, but to acknowledge what we owe to it, and to understand what's changed. I think it's a better way of understanding the present and thinking possibly about the future. So I haven't really talked much about the stuff on this slide because you can read it, and I don't think I really need to say much more about it. If you want me to, you can ask in a Q&A, or you can grab me afterwards. But anyway, 10 years after 2015, Right to Docs has a history. And that's a piece of what I'm going to spend the next not quite 20 minutes talking about. I think this is the point at which I pause and ask. I know y'all have been asked this before, but this is a different context for it. And sorry, but I have to change my glasses here so I actually see what the response is like, because older eyes are a real pain, and I need my computer glasses if I'm going to give this talk. For how many people is this your first Write the Docs conference ever of any kind, virtual or in real life? Okay, I am not going to count you. I'm not going to count you. It gives me a sense of it, though. For how many people is it not your first conference, but your first in real life conference? It's actually a slightly smaller number. I'm not surprised by any of it. But, this is good because this is kind of what I assumed, that I would be talking to people who didn't know or weren't familiar with a number of the stories that are part of the rest of the talk. Because, like I've been saying a lot, the Write the Docs community, well, it kind of came out of nowhere if you acknowledge Eric's brain. But I'm sure that had its origins in Eric thinking about issues in software documentation and creating community too. So this is essentially the outline of most of the rest of the talk. The fact that it's as the origin story on the website, which you can go read if you're interested, please do. I believe I submitted the first PR for it because the historian was going to do that, but it has since then had any number of improvements added to it, some important, significant expansion. But its accidental origins, that word is kind of right there, I think, still on the website. One software developer who cared a lot about documentation had a vision for what would it be like if there was a community of people who cared about this stuff. And another one has a habit, or had a habit, of starting conferences. And thus, Write the Docs 2013 was born. And I actually meant to ask Eric and forgot whether he still, when he gets up to introduce, says, and we still have no idea what we're doing. I was assuming so, but I hadn't checked, right? And both the academic and the documentarian in me meant to check. It's all a work in progress, right? But coming out of those accidental origins at every conference, along with a whole host of other developments, has seen sort of more refinements, more building on those accidental origins. But that falling in love experience I had in 2014 seems to get repeated over and over again, I think, even though I had my computer glasses on, and I'd better put them back on now. I saw a fair number of nodding heads in the room. It's a special thing, and it's still a special thing. That has not changed. Some things don't change. But the conference expanded almost immediately. Already in 2014, there was a conference and an unconference in Europe. And then, Prague really took off. I spoke there in 2015, and again in 2016. Expansion, the conferences were wildly popular, but, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment, but the community also started to expand. It expanded geographically. There's also Write the Docs Australia, which as a conference had to be canceled this year, but which has, I don't remember its date, and I talked to Swapnil about this because I owed him that. Continues to be, a thing that folks in another part of the world are very much interested in working on. It's also the conference and the community have expanded virtually. And that virtual expansion has, some of it been born of necessity, and some of it has really provided, it's helped us notice technologies that help expand senses of community as well. So, but the conference piece of the expansion, because at least I have some more pictures. This is Right to Docs Portland in the early days, and it's deliberately a kind of generic picture. I'm not going to try to go into any more detail. When I went, I asked Kay for help finding some of these, and she sent me some great links, and then I started rummaging through the Flickr bits and realized that there were a lot of early photos with identifiable humans in them that I would otherwise have loved to post, but I had no idea how much consent they had given. We are now really careful about that, and I mention it as an example of a thing that the community has, and the organizers have really tried to pay thoughtful attention to. It's the kind of thing that gets more and more attention instead of less. So here's Prague, again, around the same time. The conferences, as I've sort of been indicating bits of, have gotten more polished. They've expanded to include more things. The welcome wagon wasn't always around. If I recall correctly, Alicia was one of the first people. There was a whole group of folks, I believe, in Portland who had the first idea of helping orient attendees to a space that wasn't necessarily completely obvious to navigate. And it's a deeply welcoming sort of thing. It's called a welcome wagon. But also, very much in Europe as well. It's not I'm telling you my stories. The things that I saw, everybody who's been involved in Right to Docs one way or another has their versions of the stories I tell, and they have stories I don't have any clue or vision to. All of those stories matter. I'm up here telling mine, partly as an inspiration to encourage other people to tell theirs. But the conferences did keep growing in welcoming sort of ways. This is my story. I helped with the unconference in Portland from 2015 through, well, we won't identify a terminus year yet. But in 2015, we were literally writing unconference sessions on the mirror in Lola's room. It's the downstairs space in the old space, Crystal Ballroom. We were simply making up how to help people put up information about unconference sessions they wanted to hold. We didn't, as Eric likes to say, we didn't know what we were doing, but we managed to improvise something. This shot is from 2019. We were still struggling, but at least we had something that resembled a whiteboard. That said, its supports became so unreliable, we had to go back and to tape the whiteboard to the mirror. So it's a kind of nice recap of a thing that I struggled with a fair amount, along with a lot of other great folks. But we've also, Chris told me right before this talk that the unconference was full upstairs. I've gone up there to check because I've been curious about how the unconference looks and works here. Really, I'm trying to develop a not exclusively US perspective here. And I was actually kind of pleased because the unconference and the way it's taken off is part of my story of how the community has taken Right to Docs and made it its own. Because that's my sense of what's happened with the unconference. If you look at the archival history of the page about the unconference, there didn't used to be anything like so much information, but we had to provide more, and other people actually came up with most of this, more and more guidelines about how to run an unconference session and what to do when your unconference session got so popular that there was not enough room in the entire unconference space for all the people. At Write the Docs Portland this past May, we sent them outdoors. Fortunately, it was not raining. So, what about not conferences? Meetups. Meetups actually got off, Write the Docs meetups got off the ground the same year as the first conference. The first meetup was, in the US anyway, was in San Francisco, 2013, and they grew rapidly. They've kind of ebbed and flowed in the 12 years since then. And obviously, circumstances pushed them in different directions. At the Portland 2015 conference, as I recall, and I think I've talked to a few people who remember the date, but it's approximate. Historians aren't always really good about dates either. We started a forum. I think it was a Discord forum, but I'm not sure about that either. That's when the Slack got started, because there was clearly an appetite for conversations outside the limitations of meeting in real life. The newsletter was born of frustration with the free Slack, but it's become a different kind of resource. There's website content. For a while, there was a fair amount of interest in the guide on the website. Hint, hint. We even had a virtual writing day session in which people contributed a lot of good stuff. And by the end of 2019, the conferences had outgrown their spaces. Crystal was at capacity. Auto Club in Prague was at capacity. And we were looking at the possibility of yet another conference, US East, to be held somewhere around Washington, D.C., because, yeah, I was part of that conversation too, along with a bunch of other great folks. But then, this happened. And so for, a number of years, for more years than many other conferences, Write the Docs went entirely virtual. And that did actually provide something of a solution to the physical expansion problem. And because I've done a lot of preamble talking, and now I get to do again what I did in 2015 and rush madly through my last few slides, we've continued with virtual. Interestingly, this year, and even further, more meta stuff, right? This conference is both, as Portland was also. It's a real expansion of opportunities for community. I see it very much as a gift that the pandemic might have given us. We won't talk about what else it might have given us, but so where are we now? I don't have as much time as I'd have liked to get into the community, sort of the more sort of, what does this mean for community building stuff? But I think I've sprinkled enough of that throughout the talk that you've got some indication of where this might go. And what I mainly want to talk about here is different models. I mean, one of the things that I think makes Write the Docs different from pretty everything else on this slide is its accidental origins, its informal development. We're just going to skip to the next slide. No, we're skipping. We're skipping to the last slide. This is so much shades of 2015. I guess I should have known what I was doing when I invoked it as my origin story. So what's different and what's the same? You can have quick spoilers here. It's not all software. I really wanted to say more about that, but we can talk about that elsewhere. I don't think that's the most important part of the talk anyway. There are different organizational models, and not just the model that STC, ISTC, and techcomm follow. They all have that kind of similar. They're all similarly sort of very hierarchical and structured. And we do all, us and those more structured orgs, and pretty much everybody who talks about this stuff, we care about documentation, whether it's software or hardware or aerospace, or medical devices. Well, that's hardware. We care about technical writing as a profession, which is something kind of different from what the original conference envisioned. It was about the documentation we all produce. And there's a real interesting, and I think somewhat different, kind of cross-fertilization around conversations of what does it mean to do technical writing? What does it mean to have the job title technical writer? And what does it mean to produce good docs? Those things are not completely coterminous, but they're obviously very much overlapped. It's my understanding that at that very first conference, the original organizers were somewhat surprised to learn that there were people who actually did technical writing as a job title and a formal profession. But hey, that just made things bigger and more inclusive. So, time is up, Andrea tells me. Read the slide. I have a lot to say about the open source effect, if anybody wants to talk about that. And not as much to say about what's different now, because I think I've already said a bunch of it. So thank you very much for meandering with me through these slides and providing rather more of the 2015 experience than I had originally intended. But hey, I wasn't sure. So thanks again.
Thank you. Good. A few questions in Slido as usual, but first, some kudos for this stab at telling the history of the Write the Docs community. It's formidable, to say the least. But of course, there is the unconference because there's a lot to say as well, if we'd like to take it from here after the Q&A. You mentioned...
That's a thought, and I'm the one who didn't think of it.
That's why we're here, all of us. So you've said what's past is prologue, and also I'd like to add, as we know, history repeats itself. So I'm going to load Slido. We had a very pertinent question on that topic, or on that note. As an historian, or as a historian, do you see trends within this community or documentation in general mirroring more general historical trends?
Well, yeah. I did deliberately leave out some things that are relevant to the stuff I was talking about, and larger contexts I had to leave out because I ran into time issues as it was. But yes, I do. Mm-hmm. Should I say more about that? I mean, there's the elephant in the room, right? Except I don't think it's an elephant. You know, there's tables out there about it, and they've been, I believe, the most popular unconf sessions.
The croissant?
AI.
Oh. AI.
Well, actually, yes, the croissant. Croissant and AI. That might sum up a piece of this, right?
AI generated croissant. But
you said it, not me.
No, sorry. Staying on topic, back to you. It's an elephant in the room, as you're saying.
Well, I haven't been talking about it, although it was on the slide that talked about things we're all worried about, or worried about wanting to address, worried about is maybe too. I mean, plenty of people do worry about it, but
have feelings about.
Yeah,
have human feelings about.
Yes. I mean, it's an obvious context that's bigger than techcomm. It's not bigger than software because it is software, but.
Okay, I'm going to pivot while we have just a bit more of time because we do have a lot of upvotes about what the past might foretell for the future of this community. This person says, this is our first in-person European conference since 2019. It's based on the talks and the other discussions that you've heard here at this conference. What changes do you find promising? looking away from the elephant in the room, maybe.
No. I mean, the fact that there is finally an in real life conference in Europe is to me the obvious one. But I also find the virtual in real life combination really promising. This is the first year we've done it. And I honestly don't know how well it went in Portland. I'm going to have to go find out. I mean, I was downstairs getting hurting for the unconference, and really it's a full-time job, even with, I mean, it's not a one-person job either. It's multiple people. But I think that's tremendously promising. The more ways we can expand access, I mean, the Slack continues to grow, and people come to Slack from all kinds of places. Our technical writing is one of them. Hacker News is one of them. It's not all about the conferences. There's just so much more community, and I see that even if, like for a variety of reasons beyond our control, the conferences themselves could shrink in person. But there are other ways we can continue to build community and are doing it.
Yeah, you've mentioned the Australia conferences, which have taken place in the past, and even if they don't take place this coming year, or it doesn't take place this year, the community is very much there and alive.
Well, there was a community-organized Right to Docs conference in Kenya.
Oh, wow! Applause.
Yeah,
please.
this year.
Yeah.
This year.
For the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the global reach is and there are other tech writing communities around the globe too. We might reach out to. I will try to post the slides. Then you can really have a laugh at my notes.
Sure.
But because I do mention some of these other things. But yeah, there's a lot going on, and a lot that does in fact at least sort of get discussed. Some of it in the Slack. It depends on on what you pay attention to. And we've all got our own, the community is not one great mass, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we're providing more ways for people to get involved in parts of it that matter to them.
I think so too. So we will go ahead and break for lunch. It's time for lunch. Thank you, Jennifer. It's time for also a break from the keyboard and screen if you've been joining online, participating online. So we will see you back here afterwards for lightning talks from Adrian, Sedana, Jorge, Julia, and Marco. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer.